Well, the war in Ukraine is having impacts in so many areas right now, but from the perspective of keeping economies around the globe connected, two well-known individuals in the financial sector have come out recently and talked about the potential end of globalization. One of those is Oaktree Capital Management co-founder and co-chairman Howard Marks, and a pleasure to have him joining us on the show right now. Howard, great to see you again. Hope you're doing well.
Thank you, Dan. Nice to see you as well.
So in the scope of this this theory that you brought forward around globalization, you put this in your annual letter to your investors, and you use the pendulum to kind of better understand what is going on right now. Explain that a little bit.
Well, look, there are all these things which are choices. And in most things, they are pluses and minuses. So A is better than B in this regard, but worse in that regard. Which do you choose? And it depends on what you're emphasizing at a point in time. So if you care mostly about this, then you'll choose A. But if your attention switches and you care more about that, then you'll pick B. And it swings in kind of a pendulum-like manner, and it doesn't spend much time at the happy medium. It doesn't compromising those two things, whatever they may be. And since there's no perfect solution, people tend to oscillate between the two, especially as conditions change. And so, what I said in the memo was that, 10 or 20 years ago, for example, we were happy to close down our production of semiconductors in this country, or let the growth occur in other countries, and buy from them because it was cheaper. If you bought semiconductors made in Asia, it cost less than if you made them here, for a variety of reasons. Now, with the pandemic, the supply chains were interrupted, and so then now the wait for a semiconductor that once it's ordered is roughly doubled. And so now people say, well, I'd like a more secure, dependable supply. So the pendulum swung. First it was cheapness, now it's dependability. One day after we've had 5 or 10 years of dependability in the States, people will say, well, I guess it's not so bad, and I'll switch back to cheapness, and and maybe the sourcing will go back to overseas, and so forth. And similarly in energy supply, at the present time, Europe gets about half its energy from Russia, and they switched to Russian supply, shut down their nukes, for example, because it was clean and environmental, and any damage done, drilling or spills or something like that, would occur elsewhere. So they switched in terms of green supply. Nowadays, given the war, they see that involves dependence on other countries, some of which are not so dependable. So now it's switched to certainty. And someday when the war is settled, and hopefully one day it becomes a memory, maybe they switch back to greenness. So I do tend to see these things as a pendulum. I think the pendulum is going to swing back toward US sourcing. And that, of course, has certain investment implications.
Meaning specifically what? What are you most focused on in and around these potential changes for the investment community?
Well, I think that if people want to create their own raw materials or intermediate goods, let's say components, in the US rather than buy them from Asia, they'll have to build factories. And so they need land, they need construction, they need equipment, if they do that, then they say, well, we need power, and we would like the power to be renewable, and we need a community to grow up around this new factory if it's a big one, greenfield, and so we need somebody to develop residential and shopping centers and all that. So you can imagine that if this is done on a large scale, as I imagine it will in certain areas, semiconductors are a great example, because semiconductors are essential in everything we do that's electronic, computers, and certainly even national security is highly dependent on our ability to create our own semiconductors. So if that comes back to the US in large scale, that's going to involve a very large expenditure, as I believe it will.
So I guess to a degree, there's also a little bit of a timing element here when you're talking about if companies are not going to be outsourcing as much and they're going to build manufacturing and they're going to have more of this build out here in the United States, that pendulum swing may vary in terms of how quickly it moves over the course of the next couple of decades.
Oh, well, absolutely. You know, so the pendulum is an idea, and in nature, the pendulum is a mathematical relationship. There's the pace of the swing in one direction and the pace of the swing back, and these things are, certain. But in economics and anything else involving psychology, which is largely where we see the pendulum, there's no certainty. There's no regularity. This is not a physical science. So you're right. The pendulum could swing fast in one direction and slow back, or it could go not too far in one direction, but much further in the other direction. It's not dependable in that sense, but I think the pendulum is only dependable in the sense that yes, it does swing, and then it swings back, and then it swings again.
Part of the issues here, and you mentioned it a moment ago, is the issue of energy consumption by Europe and the product that is coming out of Russia, and that's obviously an important topic right now.
Yeah.
In terms of where that goes, what's the workaround for European countries then in the future, and potentially what role will the U.S. maybe have to play in that?
Well, number one, take Germany, for example. Germany has been closing down nuclear power stations because they're not green, because the Greens don't like nuclear power. They think it's dangerous and antisocial, if you will. And so a year ago, they had 6 nuclear facilities left, and they closed down 3 of them at the end of last year, and they were scheduled to close the other 3 at the end of this year. Now they're talking about not closing the 3 at the end of this year and maybe restarting the 3 that they closed last year. So there's a swing. Again, a year ago, green was the most important thing, and now energy security is deemed more important. We talk about installing harsh sanctions against Russia, and that's how we're going to discipline them. But we're not sanctioning oil and gas exports from Russia because Europe needs them, and they can't go without oil and gas at this time of year, and at this time in terms of their energy dependence. So they have to. So Russia can still sell them oil and gas, which means Russia can still get 20 billion a month of hard currency, and that in a sense supports the war. So the inability to install an oil and gas sanction supports Russia's war effort. We have to stop that. But how do you become energy not dependent? So I do believe that they will look more kindly, for example, on nuclear, and not close down and restart and so forth. Nuclear is, there are people who believe that nuclear is the best source of large-scale power that does not produce greenhouse gases. Now, other people think it's dangerous because what do you do with the spent fuel, and what do you do if a reaction gets out of control, et cetera. There's certainly Chernobyl was right near the fighting, so we certainly know in our time that these things happen. But people's decision factors have to swing.
Well, and it sounds like, and we're talking with Howard Marks, who is a co-founder and co-chairman of Oaktree Capital Management. You're talking about a reevaluation by Germany and the other countries in Europe as to their energy programs and what they can do in the future, potentially how they can rebuild. And I guess part of that also plays in to the story we're hearing around natural gas right now, with Nord Stream 2 being shut down, and what that's going to mean for natural gas availability in Europe for the future.
Yes, well, so. But it's what happens with commodities. When I went to Wharton 60 years ago or something, I learned about supply and demand, and price is very influential. So and what you learn in Econ 101 is that if the price goes up, the demand goes down. So
Right.
Europe already has gas prices, gasoline prices, which are significantly above ours because they tax it more heavily to discourage use. And I dare say that if they want to stop sourcing from Russia, and if there's no alternative, I guess they'll raise the taxes and further discourage use, or the price will go up and that'll discourage use. You know, that's the way things work, especially in the commodity world. Supply, demand, price.
I guess in many cases, you know, in terms of the outsourcing, for some companies, for some countries, it's just easier to outsource, even if it is with a country you know may be doing wrong.
Yes, well, look, this is the nature of international relations. A need for energy, for example, as they say, creates strange bedfellows. We need rare earths, for example, to produce a lot of the things we produce, and you need China for that. So China, we're dependent on China in that regard. We've always done business with regimes of a variety of tastefulness, because of your needs. And if you look around the world today at the people who have not disclaimed Russia, I think that at the UN General Assembly, I think it was 140 to sanction Russia and 5 to not sanction Russia, and something like 35 abstentions. And I think a lot of those abstentions were people who want to play both sides. Yep. They're not happy with Russia's behavior, but they need to have good relations with Russia for this reason or that reason. And trade is one of those reasons.
What do you expect then we're most likely going to see in the months and maybe even years ahead on this want to build globalization, but obviously the challenges that are going to be out there, especially when something like the Ukraine war may very well be something we're talking about for years and not just months?
Well, Dan, I wrote a memo a year ago about the time I spent locked up with my son and his family during the pandemic. And one of the things that came out of that is that I have a new policy of not expressing opinions and things I don't know anything about. I think it's probably a good policy. Many people should take it up. But anyway, I don't know anything about Ukraine. I tend to believe in people's goodwill. Well, lately that's been a mistake with regard to Russia. And I didn't think that it would make any sense for Putin to invade Ukraine, but that didn't keep him from doing it. So either he didn't care about what made good sense, or I had an incorrect view of what made good sense. And so I don't have any predictions to make. And the other thing is I'm an optimist. So if left to my druthers, I would say, well, clearly they should settle and stop going to war and have peace, and Russia could someday return to the community of nations, maybe. But I certainly don't believe that my belief is going to be binding.